Welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 95, Understanding the Flow State with Chris Neal, Part 2. Today's sponsor is brought to you by J&K Productions. Did you know that not only are they a production company for podcasts, but they are a recording company for musicians? Any musical recording needs that you may have, J&K Productions can fulfill that need. They have all the necessary equipment and expertise to record your next flute recording for college or graduate auditions, competitions, summer festivals, or a flute album. J&K Productions can record any setup imaginable, from solo flute, small chamber, flute and piano, and much more. Consider J&K Productions for your next recording project. Contact them at jkproductions.media. And this is kind of ad-lib, but the more I'm listening to you and hearing your research and these resources, I'm thinking of maybe I know musicians can relate to this, but just any musician who is wanting to get to that next level of their playing and they just feel stuck. I'm getting a sense of hearing this information from you that just by understanding how the mind works and understanding these different states that our brain goes in and out of and just what our bodies do and how they are, made up and all of this beautifulness, it could really potentially, what I'm hearing, this is how I'm interpreting it. Maybe I'm very wrong, but I would think that this information could help you get to that next level of your playing. Is that safe to say?
Well, I hope you're not wrong.
Okay.
I think you just sort of touched on the goal there and whether we find this sort of quintessential flow or not, still just finding that place where we can make music maybe less encumbered by doubt and self-judgment. I think even if we get there, that's a great goal. And it's certainly going to have implications for the quality of our performance and the ability to connect with other people. And for people who haven't heard this word flow before, sort of the history of that, there's a psychologist, and I'm probably going to mispronounce his name. I think it's Csikszentmihalyi.
Yes.
And he's got a book that's called Flow, which is kind of a bestseller, and he talks a lot about what flow means. There's also a really interesting book by Steven Kotler called Stealing Fire, where he kind of talks about flow in a group context. And so he has some really interesting descriptions of Navy SEAL training and those sorts of things. And I think there are probably implications for teachers and ensemble directors in particular, because I think it's one thing to create flow in a solo context. I think creating flow in an ensemble context is quite another challenge. But I think for anyone who's been in a musical experience where you just have this kind of time goes away and you're just completely immersed in the musical moment with others, I don't know if it's necessarily more difficult in an ensemble context, because then we have the opportunity to be inspired by other people in the moment. I don't know. I think that, it's the goal, though, to get out of our own heads and be able to just experience that in ways that is maybe inspiring to our audience.
Yeah, I kind of have to laugh at my last comment. Of course, if it wasn't going to benefit us in some way, why research it and study it and have this discussion? So I don't mean to sound that disconnected. I guess what I was trying to say was, here we are as musicians thinking, okay, I want to get to the next level of my technique. And we're only focusing on, getting it faster, the metronome going up, think about what the fingers are doing, but maybe take a step back and look at the whole body and the whole mind. I guess that's what I meant. Of course, this knowledge is beneficial.
Oh my gosh, Heidi, how many of us, either ourselves or our students, have just felt like we beat our head against a wall with a piece because we just metronome the heck out of it. And I mean, hey, I was a Texas band director. I'm all about the metronome, but at the same time, we can try to cognition ourselves into oblivion with our music when sometimes almost what we need to do is to figure out how to think less. And I'm always intrigued, and again, I've sort of talked about sports a little bit, how many of us have been at anything from a professional game to a little league soccer game where kids are playing and, the coach or someone else screams at the top of their lungs, think, when in fact, what we don't necessarily want them to do is to think more. We want them to respond and react and be in the moment. And sometimes thinking is the antithesis of that.
Yes.
Now, we need mastery before that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get there? I mean, that's a very personal choice.
Yeah. It's kind of like a coach in the ring with a wrestler or a boxer, like him coaching him, with the water bottle in his mouth and he's sweating and he says, okay, remember left hook and right hook and dodge. And I mean, it probably the coach, he means well, right? Or she means well, but at the same time, having too much thought to it kind of loses that flow state.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we can get in our own ways by overanalyzing and again, when people say, well, you need to think less, it's like, well, duh, I know that. If I knew how to do that, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And so again, I get really frustrated sometimes with people who don't understand what it's like to experience anxiety or experience, this kind of busy brain. Because when someone says, well, you just need to get out of your own head, that's actually code for, I don't really understand what you're going for.
Okay.
And so if I knew how to do that, it wouldn't be a problem. And so I'll kind of refer the listeners back to some of the strategies that we talked about in episode 92 that, we talked a lot about yoga, meditation, breathing exercises, biofeedback, a lot of those kinds of things can help us. I mean, really, Heidi, the goal is to be present in the here and now. And when we can find our own recipe for being present in the here and now, and I got to say, it's not just about performance. It's also about practicing. I mean, I think finding flow in practice can be equally as gratifying.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my teacher, he called them velocity studies. It was basically a scale study where we'd skip the second scale degree. So we go 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 4, 3, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 4, 3. And then we would go up to 2 and repeat the pattern over and over. And so you would kind of get into this groove where you're going and I know, pianists have their hand in studies and flutists have all their stuff as well. But sometimes I think that is almost the ideal place to learn how to get into flow because we're not thinking so hard about what's next. We're not trying to figure out what key we're in. We're just focused on the sound and the moment. And so sometimes I think even those just really basic repetitive technical exercises, I don't know about you, but sometimes I found those more comforting than anything when I was practicing. And I would do those probably more than I needed to from a technical standpoint, only because I found them, I don't know, it was almost kind of like, I don't know if you know Temple Grandin, in her story, she was on the autism spectrum, and she invented this thing called a squeezebox that, would actually kind of create pressure around the body, which for her was comforting. Or, a lot of people, we use weighted blankets for calm. For me, those studies were almost kind of my weighted blanket or my squeeze box. And, it just kind of creates a sense of safety and security where you can just go into this, again, you lose track of time. And so I think if you want to learn how to flow, I don't think Burton Sonatine is the place to learn that. I think, what is that study that every flutist in the world does that?
Taffanel Gaubert?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, Taffanel Gaubert is probably where you learn how to flow before you learn how to on any of your repertoire, I would think.
Well, it's funny. I never really put the 2 and 2 together until you just said it. I flow beautifully in practice. Like doing T and G, we call it T and G. Just goes from the tonic to the dominant, back up and down in the various keys. But I could practice if I don't set a timer for like 30, 40 minutes to actually get up, stretch, drink some water, eat something, I could practice for hours and that's not good for my body or my mind. And I want to make sure that I'm very attentive and disciplined with my time and I know what I'm doing. But for me, until you just said it, I just realized that my practice sessions are a state of flow for me. I could practice for hours on end and I'm in pure enjoyment of that time. So now just getting it on stage, right?
Well, yeah. But I think also having respect for what's different about that being on stage. I mean, again, holding space for what do you have at stake when you step in front of other people? Because I think, in the practice room and I think every musician has some degree of frustration over, gosh, I've done this so well in the practice room. Why can't I get this to come out on stage? I think we have to respect the fact that just emotionally, I mean, everything about being on stage is completely different and completely counterintuitive to what we do in the practice room, which is why I think it's important that we practice performing. I think that was the beauty of teaching in a small department when I did is, my students could get on stage almost any day they wanted. At a conservatory, you can't do that, I don't think. But that's why I think practicing performing can be so important for us. I think even just getting in front of different audiences where you have different degrees of at stake. Because obviously, if you get up for a recital hearing or a sophomore proficiency or a senior recital or a graduate recital, you've got a lot at stake there because there's more than just getting applause riding on that. Whereas if you go play at a nursing home, you go busking at the subway, you go do those kinds of things. I think that's why it's important to perform for our peers, people that we trust. I think getting different degrees of demand on not the musical part of that, but the emotional part of that can really help us kind of gear up for that. Heidi, you've got me thinking too. I think maybe we can learn a lot from jazz players about this too. Because, I mean, if there's anyone that can get into a flow playing tonic dominant, it's a jazzer. I mean, those guys are ridiculous in just their work on just patterns, right? And I would say anytime you get feeling, any listener, anytime you think you've really learned your scales, go buy a book called Patterns for Jazz, and it will humble you in about 3 lines. It's just, and a lot of jazz players use it. And I learned about that book from a jazz player and I thought, oh yeah, I know my scales. And then I got into that. I thought, yeah, I don't know anything. Okay. So it'll certainly make you a better player.
Oh, good.
But I think one is, the extent to which they engage musical patterns in the practice environment. But there's something about improvisation that I think jazz players learn more and I think become inculcated into this unpredictability in performance that in classical playing we are just completely uncomfortable with in most cases. So I would say one of the best things that ever happened to my classical playing was beginning to learn to play jazz. And for people who hear me play jazz now, someone who doesn't know anything about jazz usually thinks I sound pretty good. Anyone who knows anything about jazz goes, "What are you doing?" And so, which, I'm comfortable with that right now. I've still got work to do on that. But I think that for a classical musician who's struggling to get comfortable on stage, I think hanging out with your jazz friends and getting even some very basic call and response improvisational things going, I think that has real implications for us in classical playing that still is underappreciated. I really do.
Well, it's crazy because this podcast, this platform is such a blessing to me because I tell my listeners all the time that I hear the information from the person I need to hear it from at the right time in my life and that season in my life. And somehow, the stars align where it works for me like that. And when you or a guest hits the nail right on the head, I go, oh my gosh, you have a secret camera in the Airbnb and you're watching what's going on in our conversations at home, because Eric and I were just talking about that. He's a blues guitarist and he does improvisation. And, these conversations, and when I get the content ready for an episode, we talk about that topic. And so he knows we're talking about performance anxiety and the state of flow and, the stage. And he knows all my ups and downs with this whole process. And he's like, Heidi, you just have to improvise. I keep telling you over and over again, you just have to improvise. And he goes, the reason being is because he goes, when I improvise, I am not thinking, okay, 1, all right, 4, now 5. He's like, I just go with it. And he's like, I go with it because that sound, that little lick I want to do sounds really cool there. And I just want to play it just for the sake of sound. And he's like, and if I get off, who cares? I hop in on the next bar and, do my progression and I continue. And so I'm going to now, since my stars have aligned and you have mentioned that improvisation is or we could really sell it to the classical musicians to maybe help them in this arena. I'm going to take a leap of faith. And, Eric's been down my back about this for a long time. And now I'm hearing it from you. So I'm just going to have to go with it and be brave and say, all right, I'm going to try improvisation because I've been hearing this theme come up. You know what I mean? And now you're just kind of the cherry on top. So,
well, I don't want to lure you into a false sense that I actually know anything because I don't know if I do, but sometimes I accidentally get close. But yeah, and Heidi, you bring up an interesting point because I think learning to improvise, I think most classical musicians are probably pretty insecure about that, and they don't want anyone else that they value to hear them try to do that. And so I think the fact that you would entertain doing that with your partner, I think just says a lot about the trust that you've established there. Okay. I think a lot of musicians do not want to make music in front of their partners because, they just, I don't know. Yeah. I think it's hard for some people. So I think a couple things for flutists to remember is the Bolling suites don't count. Okay, those are great pieces, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, making music that's not written on the page and embracing the idea that unpredictable things are going to happen. And I think that's a really uncomfortable space for all of us who were raised in the classical, read the notes on the page. I mean, how many of us were taught for, decades that don't you dare play anything that's not on the page? Why would you do that? But I think improvisation is kind of like meditation for some people. People kind of assume that either you can do it or you can't. And most people who don't do it assume that they can't. And it scares the heck out of them. So I think it's an initial hill to climb to just even get to a place where we could even try it, and, maybe when you're in the practice rooms at 3 a.m. and no one else is there, hey, try swinging a Mozart concerto and giggle to yourself a little bit and then go, build from there. I don't know. But embracing unpredictability. Yeah. I mean, it's, however we get there. Right. And I think, the great jazz players, they, and I love that your partner can just not think and can just play, that's great. Most really great jazz and blues players that I've met, that was a progression for them. And they kind of started by learning, okay, well, over this pattern, this is what you play and this is where we start. And then we're going to imitate this player and then we're going to change that. So I think that there is a lot of listening and imitation that goes on in the early stages of learning improvisation.
Oh, for sure.
Then,
like our conversation, and that's what he said. He's like, Heidi, at first you're imitating. You find something absolutely. You like, you imitate, and at some point with enough experience, you get to make up your own stuff that you hear in your head. So to kind of give the listeners a little background there.
Well, and it's funny when you think about improvisatory playing as a classical player. I mean, we think about cadenzas, but I don't know about you. I've never done a cadenza that I didn't write before the performance. I mean, that's always been written for me. I mean, and I know that, we hear stories of improvised cadenzas by Bach, and, I'm sure there are players out there who do improvise their cadenzas. I'm sure not one of them. And so I think it is. It's unfamiliar territory for us. But I think if we want to get out of our own heads a little bit, I think maybe this process of learning to embrace unpredictability and being okay with that may be a helpful step.
So to kind of summarize, just so I make sure that I'm hearing you correctly, to obtain or to help obtain the state of flow, we can do things throughout the day, like you mentioned, just being present, using yoga techniques and maybe breathing techniques, practicing it, like you said, practicing actually performing. Am I hearing all this correctly, just so I make sure that it's being summarized for the listeners?
Yeah, I think so. And I know I've been very stream of consciousness in this,
No,
episode,
you're fine.
but I think that some things that maybe can help us are, I think it all starts with self-compassion. I think it starts with being able to hold space for ourselves in the moment.
Okay.
As a quick aside, I know we're probably going to wrap soon, but I was going to do a resources page on my website because I know I've recommended a lot of books and talked about a lot of things, and I'll put that up, and then if you can link, that would be great. One of the things I will try to find, there was a psychological study several years ago now, where the task for the participants was they were asked to go into a room that was an empty room, and they could not take their phones or a book or anything. And their task was to just spend a period of time just sitting with themselves in silence, just with their own thoughts and inclinations. And it was, 20, 30 minutes. And they had one option while they're in the room. There was a device that they could touch that would deliver a non-lethal but painful electrical shock. And they knew it would do this. They knew what they were getting into, and they knew that the two choices were sit quietly or shock yourself with this device. And a startling number of people chose to shock themselves with the device instead of sitting for however long just with their own thoughts. It was preferable to be shocked than to sit with themselves.
Wow.
And right. So, and I think that's telling. I mean, I think we live in a world where we crave input, and input is like a drug for us. And so I think even things like putting our phones down for an hour or two or all day, I know that sometimes when I'll talk with people about deleting Facebook off their phone, they kind of get really uncomfortable with that. And so learning to just be with yourself, I don't know how you can just be with your music. I mean, especially if the idea that music is an outward manifestation of your inner spirit, I don't know how you can be alone with that and immersed in that until you learn how to be immersed in your own consciousness.
Wow.
I think that's probably a prerequisite. I don't know. Do you think that may be true?
Oh, I mean, that's so powerful. Like when you said that, I was like, wow, that resonates with me, and that there's a lot of power to that. I definitely agree. Even, being here in Greece, we don't have the Verizon carrier anymore. We have our iPhones, but we don't have the Verizon carrier because the international bill would be through the roof. So we have these, so we have these Vodafone SIM cards that we just pay for 30 days, and you get X amount of minutes and data and stuff like that. Well, we got it a month ago when we came here. Both of our SIM cards ran out. And when we went to go renew, I said, you know what, Eric, let's just put a SIM card in your phone, because there's no need to buy a second one. The connection here, even on Wi-Fi, is not even the best. Like when you go to a cafe, it's not like Starbucks back at home where the internet's really fast. It's still kind of slow. And like their 4G, it's not like the States. The connection's just not the same. And so I'm like, it's so silly to buy a SIM card for my phone when I'm not getting good connection anyways. And so I've been like a good month. This is like our second month here in Greece, and I have not had data on my phone. So the only time I get to check Instagram, Facebook, social media outlets is whenever there's a Wi-Fi. And one of the things that has been coming up is, wow, I actually like this disconnect. I like being in the present, and I like just looking around and seeing this new culture and listening to this language. And not always and not every cafe here will have Wi-Fi. So when we sit down to have an espresso in the afternoon, you're having an espresso in the afternoon. There is no talking with my sister through Facebook or anything like that. And so I say that because just being disconnected from social media platforms has given me more time and has given me, I'm a Christian, so it's given me more time to actually reflect and see how I'm using my time. And with this extra time, because I'm not checking Facebook, X amount of time or whatever, I do have more time to spend in scripture and to meditate on the word, or to have more time for my body and do yoga. So I say all that because I think it is really good to deliberately, like if you're not in a foreign country and the connection's not good, the idea is just to actually physically turn off that phone and be with yourself and be okay with your thoughts or feelings or whatever's going through you at the time, and not having to be distracted. I think we do that because, like you said, the person would much rather feel a shock of, right? Than just be alone. Yeah. And I'm reminded of my interview and my talk. It didn't really feel like an interview, much like this, but these talks, it reminds me of a talk with Gary Schocker, the composer. And he said something very profound along those lines too. He said, it's been a while, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but something along the same lines. He's like, I don't think, in today's day and age, we are okay with being with ourselves. And he said, he's like, I'm quite comfortable with it. And he's like, that's why I can compose for hours and I'm fine with it. And he's like, that's my happy place. So yeah, this whole experience, to summarize what seems like rambling, I swear it's not, I had a point in all that. To summarize is just to say, it feels good to be disconnected. And it's nice to be it's nice to be selfish like that and say, no, like I'm here right now. And and see, with the time change too, in the beginning, it was crazy because we have a business, we have clients waking up as we're going to bed. And so we felt like for a while we had to be in 2 different time zones. And so I have to make it a point and say, all right, Eric, off, screen, no more. We are here. You know what I mean? And so I think that's healthy, and you have to set healthy boundaries up.
Yes. And it's a challenge because I think we're just, at least here in the States, I think we're just sucked into it. Yeah, I think the implications for us are profound if we don't figure out how to carve out that time and space for ourselves. And I think certainly for a performer who wants to find flow, who wants to really find that, bring the inner artist out in a public forum, I think that's probably a pretty important part of it for most people. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, but I think the person who struggles to sit with themselves may struggle to bring themselves out on stage in meaningful ways. It's just a guess. I mean, everyone's unique, of course, but
I guess you just brought it full circle then for me. Like, I am okay with sitting with myself. And I hadn't realized that, so being on stage, why do I feel so anxious to, get through it? And I don't have the time. And what are they going to think of me? But in my life, I'm very okay with taking up space. So I'm glad you kind of brought that full circle there and made the connection. Maybe there are people out there that are okay with being, I don't know if that's possible. Is that possible? It feels like it is, because if I'm okay with doing my daily devotions and saying, no, I'm going to carve out time for my spirituality. You know what I mean? I'm okay with sitting here drinking espresso and not having to check social media, every 5 minutes. Then why am I not okay then? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. No, exactly. And I think were I working with someone who were to talk about that, because I think that's probably a very common complaint. I'm this way in my personal life, but I can't bring that out on stage somehow. I think part of what it would make sense to investigate is what's different about those and what's at stake for me in the performance setting that's not being, what nerve is being touched in me when I'm on stage that's not being touched elsewhere. And, and for us, I mean, there's the musician identity and there's the performer identity. And we all grew up in certain circumstances. And, and I know that I grew up in a circumstance where your worth as a person was kind of rooted in how well you did stuff. And, I'm a child of the 80s, and, kids in the 80s, they wanted to be principal chair. They wanted to win the competition. They wanted the teacher to call on them. I think kids these days, not so much. They just want to blend in. But, in my generation, hey, you wanted to kick butt and take names. And if you weren't doing that, then you were not necessarily as valuable a person, not as valuable a human. And it's kind of a sad commentary, and but that's part of my journey, is to sort of divorce those a little bit and realize that good performance, bad performance, it doesn't make me a good or bad person, that those are completely separate. And when I can divorce those, it then kind of empowers me then to, invest in the performance no matter what. So I think if we have an experience in one case and a different experience in another, I think the logical question is, well, what's different about these two? And what's pulling me in a different direction? But, I applaud you that you can, get into that space at all in your personal life, because it's a challenge. I think society pulls us out of that. And I think the ability to do that in any case is a real gift and a real blessing.
Oh, thanks. It's definitely a work in progress, and it didn't happen overnight.
Yeah. And I think the challenge for any of us is, how do we create that portability of those instincts? Okay, well, I can sit quietly on my porch and have my coffee and watch the leaves fall off my tree, and that's a great experience. How do I then be just as okay with something else? You and I were chatting right at the very beginning of our recording today, and I was joking about how, put me on stage in front of thousands of people, I'm fine. Point a camera at me and ask me to have a meaningful talk, I'm in trouble, which doesn't bode well for my YouTube channel. So clearly there's something at stake for me there. And part of my challenge in becoming comfortable in that is reconciling that. And that's some of the work that I do with other people. And so when people contact me for help with their performance issues, then that's part of what we get into is, okay, what's at stake for you in your performance? What is your performance on the pitcher's mound, in the boardroom, on stage? What does that mean for you as an individual? And that's, I think, part of reconciling that. Is learning how to bring that mindful component in our personal lives, bring that into our performance area. It's hard.
Yeah.
I don't think the ability to do it in one area necessarily equates to being able to do it in another area. And we use the word should a lot. I should be able to do this and I should be able to do that. And that's just an irrational demand that reality be different than it is. And, so.
Well, there's
more to do there.
Yeah, just even that word should. I hear some podcasters say, well, I don't want to should all over myself. But and that word should comes up. I hear it in a dialogue with my music friends and stuff like that. And even my own personal conversations that I have, or my inner conversations that I have with myself. And it's like, well, really, should you know how to do that or be that? You never really practice that. You don't have that skill. You haven't developed that. And so when you kind of take a step back and realize, oh, wait, I don't have skills in that, then you're like, you kind of laugh at the situation with some humor and say, oh, well, why am I putting so much pressure on myself? I haven't developed that. Let me try, or let me see what happens. But yeah, that's what that brings up for me, is maybe just realizing, wait a second,
I think that why should you be completely packaged and coherent on that idea? It's something that you're working out. And I think that it's useful for the listeners to kind of do that, go through that journey with us on that. And you're right. Yeah, we're shooting all over ourselves. And yeah, one of the questions is, well, why should I know that? Why would I know that? But the other, I think, and this is where I think mindfulness work just becomes so powerful, is just, again, returning to the here and now. What's true? When I talk with people about truth, we use kind of an operational definition there that truth is something that is verifiable in the here and now. End of story. And so even accurately predicting our demise in the future is not true, or accurately predicting anything. Sometimes you get lucky. But nothing about the future is true because it has not happened yet. The only thing that is true is what's verifiable in the here and the now, nothing else. And that's where mindfulness becomes so powerful for performers, because we practice that a lot. And then, the goal is then to learn how to create some portability in our lives to then transfer that from our mindfulness practice to our performance practice.
Beautifully said. Chris, I could pick your brain for hours, but I will not be respecting your time.
I tell you what, this has been so fun for me. Thank you so much for your time and just, being willing to engage this with me. I'm really grateful for your time and energy. And, thanks for just doing your show, because I know you're just inspiring so many people. And so thank you for all your work on this and for having me. It's been an honor.
Oh, thank you. That means the world to me. And ditto. Thank you for your time and all of your knowledge and your research. And we so appreciate it.
Well, I'm happy to do it. And people are welcome to reach out to me if they want to engage on this. My website is chrisneal.com, Neal. And I will have links to a lot of the books. I'm going to create a little resource guide just for folks who've listened to these shows so that they can find the books and get access to my online course, which is just in its infancy right now. It's still free right now. And so, or if anyone wants to talk about how we might do some work together, then they can find me there.
Awesome. We will definitely put all of that in the show note links, so that way it's an easy resource for all of us to access.
Great. Heidi, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Today's sponsor is brought to you by J&K Productions. Did you know that not only are they a production company for podcasts, but they are a recording company for musicians? Any musical recording needs that you may have, J&K Productions can fulfill that need. They have all the necessary equipment and expertise to record your next flute recording for college or graduate auditions, competitions, summer festivals, or a flute album. J&K Productions can record any setup imaginable, from solo flute, small chamber, flute and piano, and much more. Consider J&K Productions for your next recording project. Contact them at jkproductions.media. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.